H.L. Mencken had his own way of escaping the heat. He spent his evenings, he bragged, in an airy suite on Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, with all the comforts of home.
Monkey business, nothing else to do. Just sit and parley-vous like monkeys in the zoo. This baby sure did know her stuff. I said, I'm through.
In the hills above Dayton, John Scopes went swimming with Brian's son, a California attorney working with the prosecution. Scopes described Brian Jr. as a pleasant fellow on the retiring side. I suspect that his hardest burden was being the son of a famous man. By day 5, the Scopes trial had stalled out. Attorneys for both sides pontificated endlessly on the virtues and the evils of evolution, while the jury waited outside. Was Darwin's theory relevant to the case? Judge Ralston couldn't make up his mind. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Brian went on the attack. Evolution, he argued, removes God from the act of creation and turns man into just another animal. Parents have a right, he continued, to say that no teacher paid by their money shall rob their children of faith in God and send them back to their homes skeptics or infidels or agnostics or atheists.
Do we have, he said, a scientific Soviet that rules in the schools of Tennessee? Who are these people? They don't belong here. They don't live here. They're not of the community. That was his issue.
Then Brian looked directly at Clarence Darrow. Ideas can be dangerous, he said. Look what happened to Leopold and Loeb. Just a year earlier, Darrow had defended 2 teenagers, Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, in a sensational trial.
They were rich, spoiled, upper-middle-class kids living in Hyde Park, which then was one of the most desirable of the Chicago suburbs, and they committed the most horrendous abduction and then murder of a young neighbor boy by the name of Bobby Franks.
It was a vicious crime with no real motive. Darrow knew his clients would be convicted. His goal was to save them from the death penalty.
Darrow used his usual line of argument on behalf of Loeb and Leopold. It wasn't their fault. Nature made them do it. Evolution made them do it. Nietzsche made them do it. They had read Nietzsche as students at the University of Chicago, and his nihilistic ideas caused them to commit the murder of a neighborhood child, and so therefore they at least should not be sentenced to death for it.
Darrow based his closing argument on his own passionate convictions. Human beings are shaped by forces beyond their control. Heredity, environment, chance. Free will doesn't exist. He saved his clients from the death penalty.
And Brian in Dayton was able to say, look, Clarence Darrow in the Loeb-Leopold case himself showed and argued for the terrible social and moral implications of abandoning God, of abandoning traditional religion, of embracing a kind of godless view of the natural order.
Whose fault is it? Is it this young Leopold boy's fault, a young teenage college student, or is it the fault of the professors who assigned him Nietzsche to read? Darrow jumped up and said, I never said any such thing, and Brian had the transcript of the trial on his knees and quoted Darrow.
But Darrow would have the last word. Taking the transcript from Brian, he quoted from the rest of his own speech. I do not believe that the universities are to blame. I do not think they should be held responsible. You cannot destroy thought because some brain may be deranged by thought. After listening to days of heated argument, Judge Ralston made his decision. Darrow's scientists would not be allowed to testify. The defense would be denied the chance to present the case for evolution to the jury.
I think Judge Ralston succumbed to the pressure of where he was at. He knew, of course, he had to be elected. He knew that he was in the Bible Belt, and he knew he needed to side with the Christian movement because they were the big followers, and of course the infidels, as the defendants were called sometimes, would not get him any votes.
The judge didn't allow the scientific experts to testify, but that wasn't bias. That was his understanding of the law. And so he thought that the only real question was whether the teacher had violated the law. Now, in that sense, what was really inappropriate about that ruling was that it was contrary to the basic point of this trial, which was to have a public debate.
And of course, that upset the apple cart from Darrow's point of view.
Darrow had come to Dayton to confront Bryan, said John Scopes. Now it seemed he would be denied the pleasure of courtroom combat. There would be no more testimony, no more debate. Even John Butler, the man who had crafted the law, was becoming frustrated. The judge ought to give him a chance to tell what evolution is, he said. Of course, we got him licked anyhow, but I believe in being fair and square and American. Besides, I'd like to know what evolution is myself. H.L. Mencken sent his last story to the Baltimore Sun. All that remains of the great cause of the state of Tennessee against the infidel Scopes, he wrote, is the formal business of bumping off the defendant. Believing the trial was over, most of the reporters left town.
You can't make a monkey out of me. Oh, no. You can't make a monkey out of me. No, no, I am human through and through. All my aunts and uncles too. And you can't make a monkey out of me. Nor you can't make me out of a monkey.
Monday, July 20th. The day began so hot and humid that Judge Ralston reconvened court outside under the trees. And then, while a crowd gathered, Darrow and the defense team called a surprise witness. If Judge Ralston refused to permit an expert on evolution to testify, perhaps he would allow an expert on the Bible. William Jennings Bryan.
The idea of the defense lawyer calling the chief prosecutor as a witness is absurd. It's a totally inappropriate role for an advocate to play. And the judge realized this. He thought it was crazy. The other prosecutors thought it was crazy. But Bryan thought it was an opportunity to have the debate, to make his case.
He knew what Darrow was going to do. Darrow was going to try to ridicule his religious beliefs, and he was not going to allow that.
Against everyone's advice, Bryan took the witness stand. The crowd swelled to almost 2,000 people.
The courtyard was packed. There were not enough seats to hold all of the people, and they were standing around. The benches had been set up all in front of the stand, so we had a seat right in front of Darrow and Bryan, and I was all set to hear the great trial going on.
Darrow began with a simple question. You have given considerable study to the Bible, haven't you, Mr. Bryan? Yes, sir, I have tried to. Do you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted? Bryan replied that some parts of the Bible should be taken literally, others symbolically.
William Jennings Bryan was sitting there with a big palm fan and a handkerchief in his hand. Darrow is in his shirt sleeves with red suspenders, which he wore,